Welcome, everyone. Hope you're doing well. We're going to get started with today's session, which is Excel Toolkit, Pivot Tables, SUMIF, Statistical Calculations, and Conditional Formatting. Our speaker today is Shannon Coulter from SDCOE. And as we move through today's session, if you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. My name is Carrie Lane. I'll be moderating the chat for you. And I also do want to note that today's session is being recorded. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon now.
Thanks, Carrie. Good morning, everybody. As Carrie mentioned, I'm Shannon Coulter, Director of Research and Evaluation here at San Diego County Office of Ed. So it's really great to be with you this morning. It's awesome to hear the keynote this morning. I don't know how exciting that is for all of you, but I do a lot of work in college access, and so it was really great to hear the state developing some of the tools that we're going to have available to us. But this workshop's going to be, about pivot tables and some statistical calculations, conditional formatting. It's going to be fairly 101, so mainly the basics of doing these kinds of things. We only have a short period of time, so unfortunately, it would be great if it could be a lot more hands-on. But I'm going to take you through the basics of using a pivot table, conditional formatting, and then you can certainly branch off on your own from there, being able to learn how to do a lot more. Pivot tables especially are a pretty powerful tool to be able to summarize data. Anybody that deals with large data sets and needs to know information quickly, pivot tables are definitely the way to go. Conditional formatting, also incredibly helpful. A lot of the people that we share information with, sometimes there's so much information there, you need to point them in the direction of what's important in the data. Conditional formatting does a lot of that. It allows us to identify certain pieces of information that are more important than others. And that's always a big part of data analysis, is just, what is important here and what needs to be shared and how do we use it. So we're going to get started with that. And as Carrie mentioned, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and I will periodically stop so that, if there are some questions that I can answer, I'll do at that point. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to start off by sharing a basic set of data. And this is completely mocked up data, just so that these numbers and figures, I've just copied and pasted a bunch of columns in here so some of this information, most of this information is not accurate in any way. So don't think about it that way. Just think about it as a basic spreadsheet that I've created so that I can show you how to use pivot tables. But just so that you have an understanding of how the data is outlined, we have a CDS code here. We have the name of a school district, county, a region, and we have ADA information here. And so that's one thing that we're going to use in our pivot table. We have information about free and reduced lunch. We have the type of LEA, and then we have a year category. So one thing that's really important, you can actually not do anything with pivot tables if your data don't have a header. That's the most important part. Pivot tables won't actually function unless your tables have a header. And you'll see how important that is in just a minute. Another thing that your data have to have is it has to have, if it's going to be usable in some way, has to have something the pivot table counts, summarizes, averages. So it couldn't just be a table purely of categorical information or text. It does need something that it can count. And so here we have dollars and percentages of things. And so that's something that's pretty easily to count. And unless you just wanted to know how many districts there were and it told you 350, that would be a basic count that a pivot table could do. But most people need it to summarize information again, the average ADA in a school district, or the average percent of free and reduced lunch in the school district. And regardless of what data you can use, hopefully you can make the connection between some of the kinds of things that I'm going to show you and the data that you actually use. So to get started, you need to click into your data set. You just need to be inside of it in some way. And then it's just simply inserting and a pivot table. That's where I start. And so we get this screen, this little pop-up menu here. And basically what it's saying to you is it's like, you need to select the range of your data. And Excel already does that for us. Excel will create like this little dashed line around all of your data. And for the most part, I'm usually working with all the data. So I just leave that alone. And then it's like, where do you want your pivot table to be placed? And in this particular situation, I'm going to put it in a new worksheet just because if I just placed it into this worksheet, it would put it over here to the side. And sometimes that may be difficult for just like instructional purposes. So I'm going to click OK. And so it's created a new screen here for me. It's created a new sheet. You can see it's called Sheet 2. And this is where my pivot table is going to live. Pivot tables have this section over here called fields. These are all the things I can draw from in order to create my table. And again, what I have to think about as I'm bringing things in here, I have to think about the ways that I want the data categorized, sort of sliced, and the things that I want summarized in the data, however I'm going to summarize it. So some of these things are natural to summarize. Some of these things are sort of natural categories. So, so for example, if I took this current expense ADA and I just clicked on it, it's going to bring it down here and it's going to put it in the values field. And really what it's telling me right now, it is just going across every single one of those rows and it's summing everything. And that's turning into like this big number. That may or may not be super important to me. I'm going to show you how you can change this from something that might be more important. But that's basically putting it over here in the values piece. Now, if I don't want it there, I can just take it out, sort of throw it in the trash, which is sort of over here in this, just in the sheet. If you just drag it out of this field, it'll go away. And I can either click on it or I can just drag it down there if I want, and it's going to put it back in there for me. What's really important is nothing that I do over here is going to affect the original data. Nothing. You're not changing the original data in any way. And that's often really important to note, because sometimes people think like when you manipulate things on the pivot table, it's making changes in the original data, but it's not. So what if I wanted to see, again, this information in a certain way by county? So now what I'm seeing is, again, just a summary of the ADA piece. So it's summing up across every school district within this county what their ADA is. Most people don't look at ADA that way. They don't look at it as a sum. They look at it as an average. So it just naturally defaults to sum. But for example, if I click over here, click on this, if I right click on it, it's going to bring up this menu. And one of the options is what's called value field setting. If I click on the value field setting, it's going to tell me like, how do I want it summarized? Do I want it summarized using the sum function? Do I want things counted, averaged, the maximum, the minimum? There's a lot of options here. But for my purposes, average is really what I'm looking for, and I'm going to click OK. Now what it's giving me is giving me the average ADA in a particular county. I also don't like the way these numbers look right now, because these are supposed to be dollars and they don't look like dollars. So I'm just going to highlight everything. And like in most features of Excel, I can go over here and I can change it into any value that I want. This is a dollar sign. So I'm going to select the dollar. So now I can see the average ADA across these counties And so again, what it's doing is it's actually giving me the average ADA in that county. So it's taking every school and it's adding up all of the ADA and then it's dividing. I do want to reiterate here, like Humboldt doesn't spend $142 per student. This is just completely fake data. So you'll notice like I clicked over here and all of a sudden my field setting's gone. It's like, how do I get that back? Well, if you click back into this particular area, then it'll bring it back for you. So as I mentioned, like this is probably the simplest way to summarize a lot of information quickly. In the old days, you know, you would have to go in, you would have to write a formula, and then it would provide you this information in the formula. Pivot table just allows you to drag and drop information in very easily. So something else that's often helpful is maybe I need to do this, maybe I need the categories a little more specific than what it's giving me here. So I can drop additional things into the rows. So for example, I also want LEA type. So immediately when I drop LEA type into this, now I'm getting the county, and then I'm getting the average ADA at what's called an administrative district, in the elementary school districts only, the high school districts only, and the unified districts only. So it's really breaking the data down for me in multiple formats. And so multiple categories. So in some cases, that's really helpful. And again, like I don't really, it's not needed. You know, that level of detail is not needed. I can just drag it out. I've done nothing to the data. All I've done is just summarized it in a different way. And it's done nothing to my original data. Now, this is a convenient way to look at it. Still a bit long, you know, I've got to scroll through all this data. So another sort of solution maybe to looking at this information just in a different summary is just dragging LEA type up to filter. When I do that, you can see it's put this information up here. I can click on that drop-down menu, and now I can select whichever I want here. I only want to look at high school districts. I only want to look at average ADA across high school districts in the state. And so here I'm only looking at the high school districts in Alameda, the average ADA for high school districts in Alameda. Here only in Fresno. If I want to look at just purely the elementary, I can go there. Again, it's not showing me anything different than what it was showing me when I had LEA type down here, but it allows me to filter things out. And I can filter either by dragging it up there, but you'll see like there's also this row label right here. This also allows me to filter a little bit as well. But I'll take that back up there. I'll clear the filter. I want everything again. And so I'll just click on OK, and it's brought me back to this piece. Now, something else that's very common. So here I have average ADA across every county. And I'm looking again at all LEA types. The one thing that gets a little challenging with pivot tables is depending on how much information that you have in here, sometimes you can lose sight of what you're looking at. And so I always go back to make sure, like, do I have anything selected here? Do I have anything selected here? Because those things can change these averages. And so you want to make sure that all your filters are either the way you want them anytime you drag something new in. So sometimes I may also want to look at year. So all I've done is I've taken year and I've dragged it down into the columns. The data set that I created for you, it's only got 1 year, 2019, but let's say it had 8 years. Then it would go from 2011 to 2019, and it would show every column going across here for every year. So again, it's just purely summarizing the data across all the counties and across all the years that there are data for those counties. And it's also providing me with a grand total over to the right. So these are, again, sort of like, I just want to, before I move on to grouping some information, I just want to reiterate some of the big pieces about a pivot table. I can always dump this out. It's just sort of like a little palette. I'm not going to make any mistakes. If I just drop this down here, like it doesn't make sense, I can drop it out. If I drop region into here, it's like, what does that mean? That's not right. I can just drag it out. It's not something that I'm looking to do. You're not hurting the data in any way. You're not changing it. So pivot tables are an easy way to summarize the data, but it's also a way where you're not messing up any of the data at all with any of your calculations. So going back here, I'm going to drop the sum in. I'm going to go into this. I'm going to click on average because that's what I want to look at. I want to look at the average, and I want to look at it by region. So again, all I've done is summarized average ADA across each one of these major regions in the state. We're here at SDCOE. So I have taken two pieces of information and just summarized the average ADA across that particular region. But here's something that I often find myself doing with the data is when I get into these kinds of summaries. I'm like, well, when I look at this, I actually have, these are sort of Northern California places, and this is one place that's Southern California. I can choose, just highlight these sections, which is selecting them, and I can right click and it'll allow me to group. I can click on group, and now it's grouped them. And so here for this group, I have Northern California. Here for this group, let me go ahead and group them. I'm sorry, sort of grouped for me. Southern California. Now I can see the difference between Northern and Southern California. So I can see, like, those are all my Northern California district regions. This is my Southern California region. And this is the difference in ADA across those two. Again, I haven't done anything to the data, even though I have typed in these two new labels. Like there's nothing done. This is my data set over here. It looks the exact same as it did before. Like nothing has changed into that data. That's, again, you're not going to mess it up. So it's always going to be in a separate sheet. If for some reason, if I don't want these categories anymore, I can just go back and ungroup them. So that is something that I'm commonly doing with data as well, as I'm grouping and I'm ungrouping them because of different categories that I need. Sort of the last little piece that I wanted to share with you with pivot tables that I think is important is I can actually look at some of this information more specifically. So here, RCOE, SDCOE, this is one of the regions. And here is the all the information related to RCOE, SDCOE. If I double click on it, what Excel has just done is it's created a new sheet for me. And that new sheet is like my original data set, but it's only showing me this region now. It's actually filtered the data for me so that I'm only looking at RCOE, SDCOE. So again, if I go back to that and like, for some reason I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, there's something like, this is something off about this data. I wonder, I just want to see it. I can double click on it. And again, it's only showing me that region. It's just a way to filter the data so that you're only seeing that particular region or county. However, the data is sort of summarized here. All right. I've been talking for about 10 minutes, so I want to stop and I want to ask Carrie if there are any questions that we have in the chat that I can help answer.
There aren't any questions, but you have some excitement over the techniques and tricks that you've gone over, especially the grouping trick.
Okay, great. All right, so again, this is sort of 101. If there's anything that that you have questions about, you want to go more deeper into, please let me know. But I just wanted to give everybody sort of the basics of how to use a pivot table, and some of the things that you should know about them in terms of like not changing your original data. That's really important. But just to summarize again, if I have a data set, I just need to click in it. I need to insert the pivot table, and I'm going to select OK here. It's going to provide me with this new sheet, and then it'll allow me to start summarizing my data in any way that I like. Again, it's going to default to sum, but then you can change that to average by clicking down here. Whenever you put some information in here, you can default to average, which is something that's fairly commonly done. You can reformat the data in any way that you want, in the sense that you can turn it into percentages, or let me just go ahead and do that. So here I have the average percent of free and reduced lunch. I don't want it as a decimal. I want to see it as a percentage. I have my counties that I want to drop in there. So here I'm seeing all the different average free and reduced lunch meal percentage counts for counties. So for example, again, it's fake data, but Colusa County is showing here 100% of the students are free and reduced. Humboldt showing 0%. I can add some different elements by just dropping here and seeing all that by district, or I can drop this into filter so that I can click on these kinds of things and just see a specific school district if I wanted. I only want to look at Albany City Unified. It's only going to show me that one. I can clear that. I can clear that pretty easily by selecting them all again and going back so that I can see the original. You're not going to mess up the data in any way. And then finally, it's often like something that I want to be able to do. These data are already grouped, but there might be a reason why I want to group like Alameda with 2 other counties. And I just clicking on this and choosing the things that I would want to group. Right now, it's not allowing me to, because it's saying that's already a group, which it is. But if I wanted to group these 2 together, again, I could go to that and I can select group, and then it would put these 2 together for me. All right, so that's a brief recap of the use of a pivot table. Let me go into a couple of different things that I find very useful in Excel. I want to show you a little bit of conditional formatting. If you don't use conditional formatting, it's very easy to use, and it's super helpful because it allows you to like identify important information really quickly in your data set, and just sort of point out some of the things that you often have to do by putting things in tables and stuff like that. Conditional formatting, again, it's not doing anything to the data. It's just allowing you to color code it in a way that may make sense to people and may help them make sense of the data. So for example, one particular way, conditional formatting is located on the home screen of Excel, and it shows you here what it is. There's a lot of ways that you can conditionally format data. So for example, there's highlighting cell rules. And so maybe I want it greater than a certain number or less than a certain number, between 2 numbers. between two dates. These are often ways that we want to highlight things. Or maybe I want the top 10% or the bottom 10%, things that are just above average. And then they have like these three sort of preset ways of doing it, things called data bars. You know, these would create little color gradients in your fields. Color scales, these sort of are on like a hot to cold kind of scale, like good to bad kind of scale. And then you have all these icon sets. Things are like, is it going up? Is it staying the same? Is it going down? You know, sort of the stoplight piece, like is it green, yellow, or red? They have all these that will also bring in things like, you know, like a proportion of the data. Like, is it, is this a lot more or a lot less than this group? So the first thing that you have to do is like, you have to select what it is that you want conditionally formatted. And here I'm just going to select this particular group of information, and I'm going to conditionally format it and just like highlight the cell rules. Well, I'm curious, greater than 8,500. It's not going to be good. 11,000. Okay. So immediately it is highlighted every field here for average ADA for these districts that's greater than 11,000. So it's just a really quick way to color code that information, you know, real quickly, because maybe that's a question somebody had. It's like, how many of these school districts are spending more than $11,000 per student? We need to know that. So that what I just showed you does that pretty quickly. One thing that you want to get in the habit of doing with any kind of conditional formatting, after you've done it and you don't need it there anymore, you want to clear the rule. Because conditional formatting is like a layer. Every conditional formatting just gets laid on top of the next one. And so if I go back and put new information in, it's just going to keep the old. So I want to clear it from the sheet because I don't want it there anymore. And I'm going to do this another way. So what if I just wanted to see the top 10%? Okay. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 districts, they represent the top 10% in terms of ADA spending. Now, again, this is fake data. This elementary school is not actually spending $126,000 per student to educate them, but I created a range of data here so that we would be able to see what the top 10% are. And these are the top 10% in this particular data set. So if you had, again, in your data, you needed to know, you know, the top, in terms of expenses that schools have, you know, what are the top categories of expenses? What are, you know, what are schools with the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch? All of these can be conditionally formatted real quickly. And again, what I find these things super helpful for is because a lot of times, you know, my supervisors are asking me these kinds of questions, like how much are, you know, what is the average free and reduced price lunch percentage, you know, in each one of the schools in San Diego, and what schools are educating kids that have the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch. And all I need to do is do this and conditionally format the data and show, well, it's basically these, you know, these last 5 schools. They're the ones that have the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch. So I'm going to, again, go back here and I'm going to clear that formatting so that I don't have that there at the same time I'm doing something else. But again, here I've selected the percent of free and reduced lunch, and I want to see the top 10, top 10%. So it's showing me, you know, this particular school district, this one, these two, and this one. They're the ones with basically the highest percentages of free and reduced lunch. Pretty quick, easy way to look at that information, color coded for people. Answer a question, relatively quickly and easily. Let me go into some of these different ways that Excel allows you to format data, and that's with some of like the bars, the scales, the icon sets. There's an additional step with these that are, got to do one more thing, but they're often super helpful as well. So if I go in here and let's just say I want these icon sets, and I'm going to choose this one to begin with, this directional one. I look at this already and I'm like, I actually have no idea what Excel has just done. It's got a bunch of down arrows, and then it's got this one, which is at 65,000 as a side arrow, and then the up arrow is the 126,000. I don't know how it's actually formatted things at this point, but I need it formatted a very specific way. So I can go into manage rules. I can click on this one and I can edit the rule. Right now, what it's telling me is, okay, so now I understand why. It's like, if it's saying like 67%, if it's above that percentage, then it's giving me an up arrow, and that's only one. That's the top third. It's the top third of the data. Now, that's not helpful. There's only one that's in the top third. This is basically the middle third, and that's the bottom third. I need a different thing done here. So I'm going to change the type to number because I'm dealing with a number. And I'm going to change this to value. So the top third, I'm really looking at places that have higher than $12,000 being spent. And in the middle, between 12,000 and 10,000. And then everything below 10,000 is going to be red. Now I click on that and apply the rule. And so now my data make a little bit more sense. So again, somebody has asked me, all right, well, which districts are spending, more than 12,000 a year? Which ones are spending between 10 and 12? Which ones are spending less than 10? And that's what this is telling me now, in a way that gives you these little arrows. And again, you could put in any of the icon sets here. I just chose the arrows. So these are the ones less than 10,000. These are the ones between 10 and 12, and these are the ones that are greater than 12,000. Again, just a pretty easy way to format data in a way to answer a question quickly. And again, they can be used in a lot of different ways. Some of these preset ways, if you just wanted to put in information about greater than or less than, or the top 10% or the bottom 10%, probably the most important thing that you want to do, because I make this mistake all the time, is I put two conditional formattings in the same row, and that's confusing, because then everything could turn out red, or however way that you formatted it. But clicking on highlighting the data, clicking on conditional formatting, clicking on like one of these preset options. I want to know everything that's greater than 10,000. Clicking OK. And so it's telling me like these are the only districts that are spending less than 10,000 per student right now. I can choose greater than, less than, between. I'm not going to get into dates. Dates are a little bit more complicated. You have to have them. Dates really have to be in your data set in a specific way in order for that to happen. But you can look at things by date ranges. Tops and bottoms, again, this is just giving us these preset ways. I can look at these gradient fills. I can look at these color scales if I'm interested in that. Again, Excel has a lot of pre-selected rules here. You can change all the rules with any of these things by going in here and managing the rule. Whatever you've selected, you'll see the rule will show up there. I didn't select one at that point, but if I went back into this data and I cleared everything, then I conditionally formatted it with these color scales. So it's going from red to green. So in a way, this is like from low to high. And like I could look at that and I could see how Excel has formatted, you know, this particular piece. And if that works for me, like it's going from lowest to highest, and the lowest is going to be red, the middle parts are going to be yellow, the highest are going to be green. If that scale works for me and what I'm doing, then I'm just going to leave it. If it's something that I need to change, I can always go in here and change these values to whatever I want. But again, quick way of just highlighting important information in the data that you have. Carrie, are there any questions about conditional formatting?
There aren't about conditional formatting, but you did have one toward the end of your pivot table time when they were asking whether a pivot table can be turned into a chart or visualization that is also filterable.
Yes, there's something called a pivot chart. And so I can actually, pivot charts really function just like charts, except they allow you to drag in information into those rows and values. It functions virtually the same way as a pivot table, except you select a chart, like a bar chart for it, and then I could drag in, for example, the district. I could drag in the region that I want. Let me see if I can. And so just real quickly here, this is the pivot chart functions the same way as a pivot table. And so it's just, again, summarize my data here for me in a basic bar chart. I can select the regions I want over here. This is all customizable. I may only want to look at 3 of these, so I could just select 3 of them that I want to look at. It's going to give me the sum up here. Again, if I wanted to look at something like the average, I could click on average and click OK. Now it's giving me the average of that data. So versus using a pivot table to do this, I would use the function of pivot chart. And again, it's all customizable in the same way that a pivot table is.
Perfect, thank you. And that was it for the question so far.
Okay. One of the things that John asked me to cover, it's actually quite a large topic, is like the statistics that you can get out of Excel. Excel basically has any function for any statistic that you want. You can go online and you can look up statistics cheat sheets for Excel. It'll give you every formula that you would ever need to actually summarize, the data using any statistical function that exists. It's a very robust tool for doing that. But one thing that I would suggest that you do that is very simple and super helpful is that there is an option. If you go to File and you go to Options here, it's going to bring up this menu for Excel options. There's something called an add-in. And there is something called, it's already added into mine, but if you don't have it, it's going to be down here, and you would click on it like this and you would hit go, and then it would install it for you. Mine's already installed, so it's already an add-in here, but it's called an analysis tool pack. And like if you select that and add it, then whenever you go to the data piece over here in the analysis, you'll see it. It's called data analysis. And it already has all the functions in there. It'll already run everything that you need to do. You just need to select what you want to do. So for example, I have a bunch of ACT scores here, and I just selected them. Somebody wants to know, like, the descriptive statistics, so mean, median, all that kind of stuff, just go into that little data analysis pack that I added on, select descriptive statistics, hit OK. I got to go back and, sorry, I selected the data first. Select the data that you want summarized. Oop. And the what you want summarized, I want summary statistics. I'm just going to select that, hit OK. And it's going to provide me with all that information. So again, what is the mean? These are all just summary statistics kinds of pieces, the mean, the median, the mode. So, you know, like in San Diego County, across all of our school districts, the average ACT score is a 22. The median, you know, the middle point, the 50th percentile is 22. The middle data point is 23. The standard deviation, it just gives you like all the basic statistics here that would go along with a descriptive statistics package. But you can click on this, and depending on how sophisticated you are with statistics, it'll basically run everything in this data analysis pack. If you use correlations, if people want to know like what's the relationship between two data points, like you know, grade levels and ACT scores, or you know, if you have information like that you wanted a correlation for, if you had, most people want to know these descriptives. They want to know mean, median, mode, that kind of piece. Like you can actually get all of that by just writing the formula, you know, like you would do it equals you know, average. There's easy ways to get all of this information. You know, Excel basically has all of these functions already built in as soon as you hit equal. You could get the average, which is the mean of all those data points that way. I personally use this package a whole lot more because you don't have to do any of those formulas, and I don't have to write 10 formulas. It's doing it all for me just by clicking on that. And again, it pretty much covers everything that you would need to do. Rank and percentile is another one that's really important. Like that's what I did here. I ranked them. Again, it's just going in there, just clicking on that ranking piece, and it's going to rank them from like this is a school with the highest average ACT score, and this is the school with the lowest. It's just ranked all the data for me across San Diego County. So I'm not going to spend, with the limited time that we have, I can't spend a tremendous amount of time on the statistics, but again, the data analysis pack is pretty much the way to go. There are two other things that he asked that wanted to be covered as well, and I want to get into sumif and average if, because this is actually something that I use quite a bit as well. And I wanted to share those two with you, but Carrie, I just wanted to ask if there are any questions before I jumped into this last piece.
There aren't.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. One person did message just now and asked if you could show us again how to get to the add-ons.
Yes, absolutely. So it's under File. So you got to click on File, and then you got to click on Options. I'm on a PC, so I'm assuming it's similar for a Mac, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't use a Mac, so I use a PC. But you go to File, you click on Options, and then under Options, this little thing's going to pop up, and I want to click on Add-ins. And then all these different add-ins come up for me. This Analysis Tool Pack add-in, if you don't have it, it would be down here in inactive add-ins. And all you would do is click on it and click Go, and it would add it in. And then you will see it up here in this analysis. When you click on the Data tab in Excel, you will see it up here in the analysis side. It'll show up there for you now. And it functions pretty much the same as a lot of Excel things do. You click on it, you have to choose the data that you want, and then what kind of statistics that you want. It'll provide you with an output of that. Okay, so finally here with sumif and average if, a lot of times, this isn't the greatest data set to do this with, but a lot of times sort of a question that I get is people want to know not like what's going on in an entire state, but they want to know like specifically about like a region or like within this particular district or like just with elementary schools. So SumIf is a really easy way of just summarizing information based on a range of things that you want to know. And so this is the formula for SumIf. You can see it here. It's got some of this information with like this column information. Then it's got this piece in quotes, and then it's got this other column information. So the whole formula for SumIf will tell you, it's like, okay, like what categories are you trying to sum? That's what this piece is. So, okay, so you're summarizing over these categories. And then within that category, what do you want? Well, I only want information about KCSOS. And then what do you want summarized? Well, I want this piece summarized. So whenever I run that calculation, it's going to give me the number 11,638. Well, instead of summing all of these pieces, it's only summing things that say KCSOS. And like I said, that's super helpful, more helpful when you can see this in a lot of data. So let me do that. Let me go over here and show you. So for example, if I wanted the SumIf function, so it's telling me, well, what's the range of the data that you want? Well, that's this piece. I want all of this because these are the categories that I'm interested in. Sorry about the scrolling. There's a lot of stuff there, so I'm going to stop right there. So I want that part. And then I'm going to put a comma in, and it's going to ask me like, well, what from that do you want? Well, I just want KCSOS. That's all I'm looking for. And then what's the range of the data that you're looking for? Well, I'm looking for all this. So let me go down there and select something equivalent to what I put in before. All right, so I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to put my, and so it's telling me, I'm going to format this as a $sign because that's what I'm looking at. So basically what that's telling me is that it's not summing the ADA expense over all of this data anymore. It's only summing KCSOS. Pivot tables will do a lot of this for you these days. Like, so it's pretty easy to do that in a pivot table. I don't use SumIf a whole lot anymore, but if you just had a really quick question, you didn't want to have to create the whole pivot table piece. They're just asking for a really quick summary of just like a specific piece of information in your data. You could sum it this way. SumIf also has an equivalent average if. So if I just wanted the average of the data, I could put average if and then put in this information in the parentheses, and it would give me the average. But again, I included SumIf. John asked me if I would show how to do SumIf and average if, but just keep in mind that these pivot tables that I showed you, like they will do all of that. I could just sum this across one school district if I wanted. I could just look at this one. So by using the pivot table and the power of a pivot table and being able to summarize information this way, it's actually a lot more efficient than I think than doing it this way today. But you have two ways. You know, if you have a big table of information and you want to summarize it, you can use SumIf or average if, or again, you can go back into your pivot table and just do it fairly quickly that way if you already have your pivot table built.
And Shannon, I hate to break in, but
Yep,
we are right about at time.
perfect.
So thank you so much for your session. And
Absolutely.
thank you to all our attendees for attending this. The next session in this track is going to be end-to-end data science with R Studio, installing and basic use. So you're invited to stay for this track, or you can visit Sched and jump to another session. And thank you again, Shannon, for a wonderful presentation.
Okay, thank you all. Really appreciate you being here.